You're listening to the Whole Church Podcast. Our efforts to educate and unite the church are made possible thanks to our sponsors on Captivate and on Patreon. You can get bonus content of our show on either of those platforms or on Apple Podcasts with a private subscription to the Amazal Ministries Podcast Network.
Exodus 35, 10 through 19. Let all the skilled artisans among you come and make everything that the Lord has commanded: the tabernacle, its tents and coverings, its clasps and supports, its crossbars, its pillars and bases, the ark with its poles, the mercy seat, and the curtain for the screen, the table with its poles and all its utensils, and the bread of the presence, the lampstand for light with its utensils and lamps, as well as the oil for light, the altar of incense with its poles, the anointing oil and the fragrant incense, the entryway screen for the entrance to the tabernacle, the altar of burnt offering with its bronze gates, its poles and all its utensils, the basin with its stand, the hangings in the courtyard, its posts and bases, and the screen for the gate of the courtyard, the tent pegs for the tabernacle and the tent pegs for the courtyard, along with their ropes, and especially woven garments for the ministry in the sanctuary, the holy garment for the priest Aaron, and the garments for his sons to serve as priests. Here Moses is having the children of Israel prepare the tabernacle in the way that God commanded him. We see everyone working together for crafts, like arts and crafts kind of stuff, tailoring robes, decorating the worship area, all of that. And even though we're no longer under the law of Moses today, as Christians, we believe aesthetics can still play an important part of worship. Rev Kelly O'Sullivan, why do you believe God had the people of Israel put so much into the decor of the worship area? And what can the church today learn from that?
So I believe looking at both the Old Testament and in Genesis and creation, and later on in the building of the tabernacle, there's a representation of creation as it should be in the Garden of Eden and the way it's described, and then later on with the temple and the aesthetics. In Hebrews 8 verse 5, we hear the writer of Hebrews reference the Old Testament. He says, "They serve a copy and shadow of heavenly things." When Moses was about to erect the tent, he was instructed by God saying, "See that you make everything according to the pattern that was shown to you on the mountain." There's a sense in which the temple, as it was built in the Old Testament, was intended to reference and symbolize and even overlap with what was taking place in heaven. And you see in both Isaiah, when Isaiah is taken up into heaven, has this vision of heavenly worship in a throne room. And then in Revelation, where John is taken into this throne room and there's heavenly worship going on. There's a throne, there's an altar, there's all of these different things. What happens in the temple, in the tabernacle, is intended to reflect what's going on in heaven. And so that's what I think is happening in the tabernacle in Exodus.
Good stuff. Hey everybody, welcome to the Whole Church Podcast. We are still in our ecumenical aesthetic series, as you can tell from this intro here we got going on. TJ will not be able to join us this time. We had a cancellation. We told you guys Shayna Watson was going to be able to come on, but instead we have another return guest, one of your favorites, another Anglican minister, an old college friend of mine, the one and only Kelly O'Sullivan. How's it going, Kelly?
It's going good. I love to be called a favorite.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, it's been a while, man. I think the last time you and I talked, and we were talking about this beforehand, was right around when our oldest was born, and that was almost 3 years ago.
Oh yeah, it's kind of a whole church throwback for.
That's right.
Oh man.
Throwback.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm trying to remember. I know you had some stuff going on with your ministry since then. Did you?
Yes.
You become you got ordained since last time, right? Am I thinking?
Yeah. So I think I was already ordained a deacon, but I've since been made a priest. For those who are not familiar with Anglicanism, priest is just a corruption of the Greek word presbyter, which means elder or pastor. So I've been ordained as a priest, and since then, as of this January this year, I'm at a new church. So I was at Good Shepherd for 9 years, and Good Shepherd was started as a church plant, and then I received a job offer, and I took it from Christ Church in Winston, and they were the mother church of Good Shepherd. So I
wow.
went back to mothership, I guess you could say.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I feel like not many people get to ask their old college friends, "Do we call you father now?"
You can call me father. You could call me Kelly. And I think one of the other historic titles was Mister. So, like the Reverend Mister was like a title
That was
name.
like a whole thing.
Just I've heard someone call me Pastor Kelly, and I just did not like the sound of that. So if you could avoid that, that just
avoid
sounds
that one.
weird, kind of country. I don't know. So
At your church, do they usually call you father, or is it?
yeah, actually, father. Father
Okay.
is typically what they call me, but
Cool.
I'll answer to Kelly. As I've heard other people say, you can call me anything, just don't call me late for dinner.
That's funny. Scrubs is one of my favorite shows, and the janitor gets mad because someone calls him stupid. He's like, "People call me many things," and he lists all these terrible things. And one of the terrible things he's been called was Josh, apparently. So I take some slight offense to that, but it's fine. Oh man. So anyway, since Tito's not here, I have to fill in his parts. So if you guys if you want to see other shows like ours, you can go to the Amazon Ministries podcast, the AMP Network website. There's a link down below. See, Brandon Knight's My Seminary Life. I do Dummy for Theology over there. Pastor Will has the homily with Pastor Chill Will over there. So, check all that out. Make sure that you're on our store getting some comfy t-shirts, some merch to represent the show and to help us keep the lights on. We'd appreciate it. And now, Kelly, as you know, I have a favorite spiritual practice on this show. Wow. One that, without fail, always engenders extra unity. I say extra unity, and that's silliness. So we start our show with a silly question. Today, I don't know why I never prepare myself for my own questions. Today, which Old Testament story would make for the best play put on by the Peanuts characters? This one's rough. I'm gonna go a little bit. I don't know if this is considered generic. Like, I feel like people are expecting me to pull out a weird story from the Bible, but I'm gonna do. I think it's a more popular one. I'm thinking Ruth would be pretty good. So you don't have too much violence or anything. They're able to, because Ruth doesn't say the word God, so they're able to do their thing where they do spiritual but not blatantly whatever. And I still think at the end you could have Lionel come out and give his speech, with his blanket and everything, like the Christmas speech. But yeah, Ruth, Ruth would work. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's good. I think coming up with something at the last minute, sometimes you come up with the most creative.
Yeah.
So I had trouble with this one. I would have wanted to go violent, but my thought was, I'm just thinking of Charlie Brown and Lucy, who just pulls the football away from him, and the trickery, the giving her old trickery and a switcheroo there.
Yeah.
Reminds me of, and I don't know how they would pull this off. I don't think they would, but Laban and his daughters, I don't know how that would work.
That would be interesting.
Yeah. So there you go.
Oh,
yeah.
man.
And it would probably not be a normal children's Peanuts episode.
Oh man. Yeah, I thought about King Josiah's story. That would be cool. That I was like, wait, that way too much violence. We can't do that. Yeah. Or Ezra would be a fun play, I think. Ezra Nehemiah would be a good book. That book would be a good play. Yeah. But maybe not for the Peanuts. Yeah. Anyway, with the silliness out of the way, we have a few questions we're asking everybody, because everybody in the series, is what I mean. Because one reason we do this series is that we have a belief that beauty can bring people closer to God and to one another. So some questions to go with that. Starting off, could you tell us a time when you've seen God in the beauty of creation, the great outdoors kind of stuff?
Yeah. There have been a few times. I remember, and it's predominantly when I'm trying to look for it. I think I'm not always the most focused person. So we had gone on a men's retreat at Laurel Ridge in North Carolina, which is a Moravian retreat center. And going on hikes there, there's really, and in the fall, is really a beautiful just beautiful scenic area. And so that's always brought kind of a beauty to that. But for me, I think I actually out in nature, it's more the terror is what reminds me of God more. So I remember we went to my wife and I on our honeymoon went to Niagara Falls. And I've used this illustration here for representing the glory of God, the weightiness, the heaviness of it. We went to Niagara Falls, and I remember as we were walking close, we were at the top of the cliff, walking close to the top of it to see the water going down. And as we were walking, there's just kind of this low rumble that I could feel. And I just felt terror. And as we got to the edge, I could see the just massive force of water coming over towards the cliff and down, and I just was so terrified.
Man.
And we were probably pretty far from the edge. I grabbed a hold of Lottie and tried to grab a hold of the ground, like the grass blades. Don't get any closer. It's scary. It's terrifying. So things like that, big mountains, heights, things like that bring a lot of terror to me. And there is an aspect of God's weightiness just in how insignificant I am, that out in nature, I get a little bit of that. The only other times that I've gotten that is actually big man-made structures. I think it was a while ago when I checked this out, but Duke Chapel. Yeah, in there. And then where else? There was a cathedral in Montreal that was just huge and beautiful inside and a lot of symbolism. But kind of you look straight up and you look at the nave, the lofty, vaulted ceiling, and there's just a little bit of a scariness to it, how high up it is and how you feel really small in comparison. So it might not be the beauty answer, but there's definitely a weightiness that nature and then those structures in particular bring.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And in my mind, that's the feeling I imagine people had when they met angels in the Bible, where they always had to say, fear not. I feel like that's gotta be that feeling, of just, all, not insignificance, just of I think terror is a good word. I like that.
I mean, you also come across angels in the Old Testament, and they're covered in eyeballs and multiple heads, and that itself, that's from a sci-fi movie. That itself is pretty scary too.
Yeah, you could get a good a sci-fi horror director to make a movie about these angels. It'd probably be pretty cool. But So next question is, would you share a moment with us, if you have one, that you felt a special connection to a painting, a sculpture, or anything like that? And it doesn't have to be a religious one, just something you felt a connection to.
Yeah. So, and I might reference this. For me, it's not as much been the visuals. I mean, apart from what I had just mentioned, the aesthetics of a sanctuary, there are some classical paintings that have really jumped out at me. And I think part of it is the beauty, the realism of that. But for me, oftentimes it'll be music. And I don't listen to music as often as I used to, but classical music in particular, Baroque era classical music really kind of sweeps me up, as it's going along. And there's a beauty to it and kind of almost a perfectness to it that I really appreciate. And it's hard to kind of describe in words. People who are more into more articulate with music would probably be able to explain why. But that's what I would say. And I love Bach. Handel. I think Haydn maybe. It's been a while, but those were Bach is probably the main one that I'm a big fan of.
Yeah. I've answered this one before on the show, but one I've been thinking of since we've been doing the series, that's a much less sophisticated answer, I guess. Bob Ross. I always get a special, there's something special about it because he makes these beautiful paintings, but when you watch it and it's such simple strokes, such simple things make this complex, beautiful painting. And I'm like, man, there's something deep there,
Yeah. And how he's able to, big mistakes are able to cover it up by little trees. Something there.
It's just wow. Yeah. And it's I don't know. It's one of those where it's especially me, because I always put myself in things. Maybe I'm narcissistic, but I'm like, I feel sometimes like I'm simple. And it's like, oh yeah, that's also a part of the beautiful painting. Like that's a part of it. Okay. So there's been a lot of studies that show there's a healing aspect to beauty whenever, humans perceive beauty or hear music that's beautiful, that kind of stuff. Kelly, do you believe there's a reason that God might have wired us this way where beauty has a healing aspect?
I'm not sure. I'm reminded of stories in scripture like David playing music and it helping Saul with his demon affliction, essentially. I haven't really done a deep dive into that. I do know that beauty is like a transcendental value, like goodness and truth, that its origin is in God himself and his nature. So I think in some respects, if God is where healing would come from and a deeper connection to him through things that are beautiful, it would make sense. I don't entirely know. I haven't thought a whole lot about that, the healing aspect of it necessarily. Yeah. But I would suspect because you'd have a deeper connection with God through beautiful created things.
I'm gonna throw in a bonus question for this section.
Okay.
I know since last time you were on, you've had 2 children.
Yes.
Has becoming a father changed how you view beauty, or like how does having kids around change how you view things?
Well, I guess beauty could be a lot more messy. I will say this. This is weird. This is personal. Nothing really theological to this necessarily, or maybe it'll turn out to be at the end. But I didn't particularly find children beautiful beforehand. I thought they're kind of snot-nosed and like, yeah, I guess your kid's okay. Having 2 girls, they are incredibly beautiful. Our oldest, Clementine, just has an incredible smile, beautiful eyelashes. Just everything about her is beautiful. And same with our youngest, Felicity. Although I think babies sometimes could be sort of not photogenic also. And in honesty, there's probably some bias to that because looking back so Clementine had some significant medical issues. And there were times that she just did not look great. But at the moment we thought wow, she's so beautiful. And then looking back, it's like, wow, she really looked rough. And we didn't notice it. And I'm sure that there's some level of relationship that causes that. But I guess little kids can be beautiful.
I get that. Yeah, I know it's not the same at all. But just thinking of like photogenic beauty, I guess, because you're like, sometimes it's hard to get babies in a photo. I'm like, it's so funny because I was thinking about like recently I had a picture I posted of me and my dog and he's sitting there and he's smiling at the camera and I'm like, he looks like such a good boy. Like this looks like such a photogenic thing. What they don't know is how much time you had to like pin him down. He's trying to run everywhere. And it's like, actually, he's not. It just so happens I held him for just a moment and my wife said outside, even though we were outside, and he looked at her right when she said that. And we got the perfect picture, but that's not real. That dog's beauty is in running around and acting crazy. He is not sitting still. Oh man. But so I've not done this before, but we do a segment before we get to like the unique aspects for this show specifically, where we're doing with everyone called the Artist Corner. And what we'll do is we'll take 7 minutes and ask some of the questions from this list. Not all, maybe just one. Just depends on how long you want to take on the question, So I'll do it in just kind of a random order. I'm just going to pick some questions and we'll take some time talking about it. Okay. Does your church have stained glass? And if so, what's on it?
We don't. I love stained glass. Stained glass is one of my preferences of church aesthetic, but we don't. So we don't. All right. We can talk about that, but we don't have stained glass.
Well then, what kind of wall decor is around your church? And what's the significance of it?
So we do have icons, iconography. There's two icons towards the front of the sanctuary. One of the Virgin Mary with Jesus in her womb as a child, and then the other of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. Both of those are pretty significant. And the one with the Virgin Mary is actually, the focus is not on Mary, it's on Jesus in her womb. And her role in that, and both of them kind of point to Jesus, different aspects of who Jesus is. But that, and yeah, that functions really in the services, just kind of reminding us of Jesus. So,
man, I like that. If your favorite Bible passage were a painting, what would it look like?
This would be an odd painting. Phineas, Saint Phineas with the spear, and the Midianite prostitute, and the Israelite man who is sinning. So there you go. There are icons of that.
That sounds like a very violent painting. I like it.
Yeah, his zeal and his faithfulness, though, is what to me, stands out.
Yeah. All right. What is the most unique piece of art that you have ever seen or heard?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that. I mean, because what comes to mind, actually, and I don't know if I would even agree with this, but film Tree of Life, is that Terrence Malick, I think? Yeah, was a really unique work of art.
What is that one about? Because I don't know that one off the top of my head.
A film, and it's kind of about the themes of gosh, it's been a while. Theme of basically growing up, and then God's place in it, and in the midst of tragedy. And there's like a reference to Job. There's this whole scene that's beautiful of basically a mother who's crying because her son, who's older, had passed away, and kind of asking, "Where were you?" And it goes back to creation. It's in this artistic depiction of creation, reminds me of in Job, God saying, like, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" And that's to me, it plays a role in it kind of it's, to me, it's a theodicy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Man, that's cool. So does your church
I might be wrong in my interpretation of that. I'm going off of memory from years ago, but it came to mind. So
yeah, no, that's good, man. Does your church have any statues that we could discuss?
No statues. Actually, I'm looking at a crucifix with Jesus on it. And the reason why I think it's probably okay is that statues in and of themselves, I don't think are bad. It's if they are of things that will detract away from the Lord. But a statue of Jesus or a picture of Jesus, I think, is okay, because we're told not to go after idols in Deuteronomy, because when you looked at, like, when God appeared on Mount Horeb, there was no form. But then we hear in 1 John 1, where is it? Let me see. 1 John 1, unlike Deuteronomy 4, that which was from the beginning, which we've heard, which we've seen with our eyes, which we looked upon and have touched with our hands concerning the word of life, the life that was manifest, and which we have seen and testified to it. That which we've seen and heard, we proclaim also to you. So the point behind that is Jesus is physical. He is visible. He is incarnate, unlike, God as he manifested in the Old Testament. And so it's okay to have depictions of Jesus. You do have statues in the Old Testament too, like cherubim, the 12 oxen. I think it's 12, right? Or it might be 8. I don't remember. The bronze serpent, and God uses these and commands these. And so I think it's not statues in and of themselves. It's what's their purpose, their telos, and what are they depicting. So but we don't have statues in our actual sanctuary proper. 2 icons,
that makes sense,
but no actual statues. I think, that there's probably a good reason to be somewhat hesitant of statues in general.
All right, one more then. How do you use music or other art in your worship time?
So we, apart from a general aesthetic of what a sanctuary, worship space looks like, and apart from the icons that are up front, which we don't use them in any particular way, they're kind of there as decor and maybe for teaching. Music is probably what would be the biggest art in literature. So we have a liturgical worship. So there's set lines, often call and response in our worship service, and oftentimes it's poetically beautiful. So people would, and so that's art in a different way. It's literature as opposed to visual art.
Yeah.
But people know the terminology, know the words of ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Dearly beloved, we have gathered here today in the presence of Almighty God. With this ring I thee wed. All of these different beautiful literature, pieces of English literature come from the Anglican worship service, actually. And then many of the great hymns of old, which have been there for centuries, we would repurpose. And we're okay with taking some from other traditions. Like the Baptists come up with a lot of good hymns. We'll take them,
Yeah.
As long as Jesus is the sinner, then we're good.
Good stuff, man.
Center, not sinner. Hopefully you heard what I said.
Yeah. Yeah. So now we're going to get to kind of the meat of the conversation. We're going to specifically talk about the Anglican Church in its relationship with art and stuff. But first, Kelly, a lot of people think of the Anglican Church as like the in-between Catholic and Protestant churches. Like it's like halfway both, like almost like a hybrid. So, I don't know how accurate that is, but it does make me wonder, how does the use of imagery compare between the Catholic and Anglican churches? Or and Protestant, I guess.
Yeah. So that is and isn't accurate. Now I'll explain what I mean by that. So historically, the Church of England, which is where we get Anglican from, did it separate it with the entire established church disaffiliated from the Pope, from the Roman Pontiff, and went through Reformation. And so it kept a lot of the liturgy, all the church buildings, the structure of bishops and all of that kind of stuff. So there is a sense of like, it does seem very Catholic, and yet it's reformed in many ways. Historically, on paper, theologically, we could say England was between Wittenberg, which is like the Lutherans, and then Geneva, the Reformed. So that's the in between. We're between the Lutherans and like the Continental Reformed on paper. And so that being the case with images, there was a hesitation towards use of images, and that a lot of that came from the Reformed side of things. And I'll give you an illustration. The Book of Homilies is one of the Anglican formularies. It's kind of part of our confession of faith, and one of the homilies is called "On the Peril of Idolatry." It's a sermon basically lambasting the use of images, icons, and things like this. Now, it was very much iconoclastic, warring against icons, advocating almost for smashing and ridding of icons. And Queen Elizabeth crossed some parts out and added some words, essentially saying, well, images in and of themselves aren't that bad, but because of what's the context, they need to be moderated a lot, and we need to be very cautious and careful. And so so there has been a historic hesitancy towards images in England, but an openness more so than you'd find in Geneva or anywhere else. And so, and Lutherans are open to the use of images. They're Protestants, but higher Protestants, higher church Protestants. So they use images, but they'd use it for teaching, So stained glass, icons, even statues as teaching tools, not for veneration or anything like that. So, and I think if there's use of images, that's a good use. As English history went on, there's this thing called the Oxford movement, which actually reappropriate a lot of historic Christian things. Some might call them Roman Catholic things. So the use of images for veneration kind of was reintroduced. through that, and then Eastern Orthodox veneration of images was sort of reintroduced. I would say probably most Anglicans would be hesitant of venerating images, honoring them. I think Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox would want to make a distinction between honoring and worshiping. Some of that gets muddled. And so historic Anglicans have said that's probably a little too far. But a use of it for teaching is appropriate. And then in historic English churches, you'd have a lot of the artwork that came pre-Reformation carried over. But you'd also have smaller parish churches that had no stained glass, no images at all. They were very plain. They looked almost Presbyterian, as you might imagine. So you'd kind of get, historically, you'd kind of get both. So it's all over the place, but it's more of a moderate view of the use of images in worship services and in sanctuaries. So, yeah.
Makes sense. So you mentioned there was some things that kind of pulled over from the Roman Catholic Church. Can you think of any specific images that remain the same from the Catholic Church that Anglicans use?
Not specifics. Not specific. I mean, like, obviously we would have in common with Rome the use of crosses, the church architecture, the use of stained glass. And stained glass could be like shapes. They're just random shapes that are just beautiful, or they're the images of Jesus and other saints or Bible stories. And I think a lot of that carried over from pre-Reformation days. So, I mean, I don't know of specifics, but there's probably a lot of overlap.
Yeah. So I feel like you kind of touched on it, but are there Anglican churches that have statues or icons of like some of the saints on display, or is that
more
left to like biblical characters?
We have the Virgin Mary, for example. I think you'll probably see more often biblical saints, but I mean, and this gets into like, do Anglicans have saints? Like the Church of England, and then some historic Protestants do have. They do honor men and women of the faith after the canon of Scripture closed. Good Christians, solid Christians who are a good example for us, and so we would call them saints. Technically, we're all saints, but there are some that their examples are worth following, and so we have a whole calendar commemorating saints of all kinds. But I think most of the time you'd see Bible stories, Jesus, biblical saints.
Yeah, so that makes sense. Don't expect a C.S. Lewis statue when I go to an Anglican church. Maybe we can get a holiday.
I think we should have Saint C.S. Lewis statues. Yeah,
and that'd be fun.
He was an Anglican saint. He doesn't belong to Rome, or he's Protestant. So he's ours.
Yeah, he's a good one.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh man, yeah, we're joking. Of course, we love Tolkien too. For those who don't know, he gets Catholic, but we like him. Yeah. So some specific images and stuff that we do know the Anglican Church uses. One is the Compass Rose. That's the thing. Doing a podcast about art, we're just gonna have to look some of this up. Look up what a Compass Rose is if you're listening. But Kelly, what can you tell us about this image of the Compass Rose?
I think the Compass Rose has come into prominence in more recent decades, maybe the past century or so. But and actually, it's interesting. There's a website called Anglican Compass, and they use a Compass Rose as their insignia. And they're kind of the front porch of Anglicanism online. So if you have questions about what Anglicans are and what they believe and why they wear funny clothes, that's a place to look. But the Compass Rose in particular represents the international global reach of the Anglican way. So as England proceeded to take over the world. The Church of England took prominence in many different places. In the U.S., even us, who we threw off the shackles of the king, we still had an Anglican Church here in America, even predating the American Revolution. And so all over the world, there are Anglicans. Everywhere they speak English, there are Anglicans. So that's what the Compass Rose in particular represents, is just the global reach from north, south, east, west, all over of Anglican Christianity.
Yeah. Actually, I really like the compass in context of church, but it is interesting because you do have this of like almost two sides of the image where it's like one is, oh yeah, that's right, we were colonizers. And then the other side is, but it's still the church's calling to reach everybody, but maybe not like that.
Yeah. A mixed bag, definitely.
Yeah.
And then and there are some places where the message was embraced wholeheartedly and spread like wildfire. So in Africa, as an example, the Church of Rwanda, Church of Uganda, and the churches in those areas, they're all Anglican churches. They really took root in the early 20th century through the East African revival. And so, and right now, so everyone thinks of England as the main church in the Anglican Communion, or the worldwide Anglican Communion, global Anglican Communion. But in reality, it's the global South that really runs the show right now. In South America and Africa and all these places that people brought the gospel actually took root. And in the West, largely, the Western churches are dying. And so it really is a global church, in part because the majority, the largest province is in Nigeria. The average Anglican is not in England, but is a sub-Saharan African, if you think about it.
Man, I think I knew that there were a lot in Africa, Anglican churches, but I guess I just never would have this is what the Anglican Church is, like usually you think of the English. Yeah. But so the Anglican Church does have a flag, and it's one thing we've talked a little bit out throughout this series about, is just churches, church flags, Christian flag kind of stuff. The Anglican Church's flag, it has a compass as the predominant, like the compass rose is the predominant symbol, but it also has St. George's shield in the center with I don't know how to say this word, is mitre? Am I saying that right?
Mitre. It's one of the little
I saw an L. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
The bishop hat at the top of the compass. Could you kind of unpack some of the symbolism of this imagery for the Anglican flag for us?
I think that imagery is predominantly used for like the official on paper Anglican Communion office. So mitre is just a bishop hat, and not all bishops wear bishop hats. Actually, I think for a long time Anglicans did not wear them through the Reformation. And the St. George shield flag with the St. George cross on it is St. George is the patron saint of England. So he's kind of like the guy. So there you go. There's a non-biblical saint right there.
Yeah, I guess.
So his flag is used for the Church of England, but it's also been adopted by several different churches, Anglican churches all over. So the Episcopal Church has a variation of it. The Anglican Church in North America, which I'm part of, has a variation of that, has the shield with St. George's cross on it, which I think it's a red cross, white background, and then in a shield. So the Anglican Church North America's insignia has that shield in front of a globe. Anglican churches all over will use that as their insignia, as their coat of arms, and sometimes we'll use it within a coat of arms.
Yeah. So is it just because St. George was English, or what is the significance where he has such a predominant place?
That's a good question. I'm glad you asked that question. And next question.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure. But
Why?
he is the patron saint, and I don't know exactly why that is. So
Okay,
I would
that's
have
cool.
I'd have to make a quick Wikipedia search, but I'm just going to be transparent. Y'all can do that on your own.
Yeah. Fun. Yeah. So then I guess on the North America version, the globe just kind of takes the place of the compass, the same kind of symbolism of just reaching everywhere. Is that kind of the
Yeah, I
thought
think
process?
so. And I think in that insignia, North America is center on the globe because it's the Anglican Church of North America. So whereas the Episcopal Church, it was just the historic Anglican Church in North America was United States. Canada has a separate Anglican Church. Mexico has a separate Anglican Church. There's a lot of history as to why ACNA is separate from the Episcopal Church. Look that up on your own time. The Anglican Church in North America, not you, Josh. I'm talking to your audience.
No, that's fine.
The Anglican Church in North America it overlaps with Canada and Mexico, and it has an international diocese also. So it's a little bit more intentionally wide-reaching.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, so J.I. Packer was part of the Anglican network in Canada, which is under the ACNA umbrella. But that's Canada. That's not U.S. in particular. So there is a little bit more of an international North American focus.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. That makes sense. Sorry, I'm just processing,
Yeah.
Yeah, that all makes sense. So are there any other images from your tradition or just from other Anglican traditions that you're particularly fond of that you'd like to mention?
In particular, I don't like that, like big insignias. I can't really think of any. I mean, there are some artwork and the aesthetic I'm a big fan of. I mean, so if I were not Anglican, I would be like a high church Lutheran, or even I would have to be a very high church Presbyterian, but I don't think I don't think I would feel at home entirely. But the choir dress, the vestments, the aesthetic and layout of the church worship area, which includes sanctuary and what's called a nave, like an upside down ship. That's what it looks like. All of that has deep symbolic significance, and I really appreciate that. And so maybe that's not exactly what you're asking, but there is a sense of the aesthetic I really appreciate.
Yeah. It's one thing really interesting. You become more and more aware of things as you get older.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember I'm going to just say as a youngling, because I don't want to say kid, because I don't know how young I was when I thought this.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go Star Wars, youngling. But I remember for a while, this conversation only sat at, do good Christians go to a church where you're wearing like t-shirts and jeans and there's nothing on the walls because you come as you are and you don't want anyone to feel left out if they visit your church? Or do good Christians wear a suit and tie to dress your best for God? And, that was like the whole conversation. And then as you grow older and you learn about other churches and stuff, it's like, oh no, that was like that question was like the small scale. And there's actually a huge like overarching thing within the church of, should priests wear robes? Should there be a sense of awe to the sanctuary, or should it be, more casual, that kind of stuff? So what is it for you that draws you into an aesthetic that's more this sense of awe of the robes, the aesthetics that you were talking about? Like, what is it that draws you into that?
I think an emphasis on transcendence. And I think that in the Old Testament, the temple, there is a sense of which it points to the old and the new creation, because there's overlap with Eden and there's overlap with what you hear with the New Jerusalem. But I think a lot of it with that worship is this symbolism that points upward. As I mentioned with Hebrews 8, it reflects kind of what's going on in heaven. But and this could be controversial to say this, but there's positives and negatives to Harry Potter. So a lot of people were like, "Oh, Harry Potter is introducing witchcraft," and I'm like, I think a lot of that was overblown. There's also a sense of like, well, now a lot of people our age are Wiccans, and I'm like, is Harry Potter the reason? I don't know. There's that, but there's also the sense of Harry Potter really pointed to something otherworldly. When you watch the movies, I mean, Hogwarts is this giant cathedral style thing.
Yeah.
They're all wearing robes. I actually think that they're LARPing Anglicanism. I mean, like, yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it is English.
Yeah, it is English. So there's something otherworldly that I think worship should be pointing towards. I think I'll say this: I could worship at a Pentecostal church and wear a t-shirt and shorts or jeans, and I would feel comfortable. And I could worship at a very high Anglican church in the nosebleed section with incense and all kinds and Sanctus bells and chanting, and I'd feel at home. I think I probably lean a little bit in the higher church direction because I think that was the intent in Scripture, and historically, like as church history has progressed, that's what it looked like for a long time. Doesn't mean it's right, but there is a sense of like the church after the apostles seemed to look very high church for a long period of time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to me. I cheat personally. So usually I'll go to a smaller Lutheran church that has the stained glass and it's got like some taller ceiling. So it's got some of that feeling, but it's not like, it's kind of like an in between for all of it, I guess.
Yeah.
But every now and then I'm like, actually I just want to focus on other people. This week's been too much and I just want community. And I'll go down the road. I know a Pentecostal church with like people I care about. And I'm like, and I'll just hang out there when I need. And then sometimes I'm like, actually, I really want to just focus on God and tune the world out. And I actually do visit an Anglican church downtown Rock Hills when I need it. And I'm like, sometimes I just kind of go where I need,
Yeah. There you go, man.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, my thought is why not both? I mean, I think there should be, I mean, the ideal of a church is it's a body. We're all members of the same body, family, and there should be a warmth, a fellowship and all of that. And at the same time, I think there should be a transcendent because it's about being with our neighbors hand in hand, arm in arm, but also it's about worshiping God. So, and I don't know if we do that perfectly. But my hope is that there should be, I mean, the hope is that churches do that. They worship God as a household, as a family.
Yeah. Yeah. And I get that. I get it can be challenging sometimes, but I think it's what we should all strive for. I like both. I like both. I'm gonna leave it at that for now.
There you go.
Well, I'm not. I'm going to throw in a note. If you guys want to be able to visit more churches whenever you need some other things and like kind of do a cheat code like I do, just kind of speaking to the audience, the key to all of it is getting over the need to agree with everybody so hard. You just accept that, or I've accepted that, most churches I go to, there is something in their theology that I don't agree with. And it's okay. As long as they're not saying Jesus isn't really God, I'll live, it's fine. Anyway, I mean, there's other stuff than that, but that's other episodes. We'll talk about other episodes.
I get what you're saying. I think you're right. I mean, like we should be, Baptists and Anglicans should be able to put our differences aside and just worship the Lord together because it's the same Jesus. All
you got to do is not baptize anyone that one service. No one will argue about sprinkler dunk. So are there any other images or icons from different traditions that you found meaning in that you'd like to mention?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm sure there are. I can't think of any at the top of my head. I mean, I do like iconography from the East. Byzantine icons, I think are beautiful. I think they're great. I like a lot of the aesthetics of the Roman Catholic Church. I think I can't go there theologically and governmentally. I like the insignia of the Moravian Church, which is a lamb. The Agnus Dei. I like the insignia of the Lutherans, which is that kind of what is that, like a heart flower kind of a thing? It looks cool, whatever it is. And so those are insignias. And I mean, really what we're talking about is, I think a lot of churches have a lot to bring to the table, specifically with the sanctuary layout, the artwork within their churches, stained glass. Again, our church doesn't have stained glass. I think it's beautiful. So I think that that's a good thing. But I think the only thing I could really speak specifics towards are hymns and songs and things like that. And I think, as I mentioned, Baptist churches and Lutherans, for example, have a lot of really good hymns. So "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God" from Luther is great. Let's sing it. I'm down with singing that every Sunday. The "Old Rugged Cross," which I think that's Baptist. Well, it's true. Why not? So I think there's whatever is true, whatever is good, we can think on these things. And I think that that's true across from the denominational spectrum.
Yeah, man. And whoever gets the credit for Prayer Bells of Heaven, hats off, sir. That's a good one. Oh, man. So that being said, one question we're asking everybody for this series. Usually we ask, for a practical thing to maintain unity. But for this series specifically, we're asking, outside of paintings or statues, what is one kind of art that you think might help people better come together and connect with God?
I already mentioned this, but music. And I think classical music. And the reason why is because there's something, and I would say classical paintings, also classical artwork and statues, because it points to, with the painting and statues, it points to something real and tangible and true. And because of that, it points to God in many respects. With music, I don't know how to describe it, but there's something true to Bach, for example. Listen to St. Matthew's Passion or St. John's Passion on YouTube. Just listen to the whole thing, and it is incredible. It is able to bring out emotions and explain with just sound and singing, and not even in English, able to explain the anguish Jesus had to go through in his Passion Week.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what it was. There's a national anthem that I found really powerful. I'm fairly certain that it was the France national anthem. I don't know what it's saying, but something about it's just empowering. So hopefully it's not terrible, but I like it. Yeah, man. Yeah, no, I like that answer. What do you think would change if more people in the church took the time to just listen to classical music together and kind of think on these things?
I think there'd be an appreciation for beauty and a return to that. I think one of the negatives of this modern world is there's kind of a subversion of true beauty, beauty as it were a transcendental, something that's objective and be outside of us. And I think looking at the classics, the music, the paintings, I think points to reality beyond us. And that's the positive behind returning to this. And that being the case, it's not explicitly devotional, but there's an aspect of it that does point to the transcendent, to God.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Neither of us are art critics, for the record, but
I'm not an expert in art. I'm not.
But I think there's something here of our current times. I'm trying to think of the right way to say it, because it's not a generational thing as much as it's just a culture thing. We put a higher value on entertainment than art. And I actually do think there's an issue there. And what I mean by that, even if you look at film, at one point, the goal of the film was to tell a story in a beautiful way. And a lot of times our movies out now, it's how much money do they make? How entertained was everybody? You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's, and you see that in music too, right? Like a lot of your bops on the radio are, it's the thing that concerns me really isn't that it's about sex and drugs, but more about, it's literally just about how entertained people are. Can they sing along? Does it catch on TikTok rather than is it deep? Is there something meaningful there? Is there something that actually is beautiful? And I think that's why I tend to be drawn to more sad songs, because typically sad songs aren't trying to be the number one on the radio. So I think it just happens that those end up being a little bit more artistically done.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah. Well, and I'll say this: I think that also overlaps with worship and music. So a lot of the songs nowadays are not sad, and yet hymns like "O Sacred Head Now Wounded" really point emotionally. Like they're not trying to entertain, you know, but they do unveil the emotional depths of what of Jesus and what Jesus had to go through. But they're not trying to just entertain and churn out number one hit to be used in churches. And so
yeah. I mean, that being said, there are some Rend Collective songs that I think are good. I'm not trying to bash them.
Yeah. Rend Collective's great.
Yeah, but I think we're on the same page here. So the last thing we do for all of our episodes, actually, we always do a God moment before we jump into our outro. TJ likes to make me go first, and since you're the guest, I guess we'll just keep up with that, and I'll go first for this. Okay. Give you plenty of time to think about it. Man, I had so many good ones. I'm gonna go back to my pollinator garden this week, guys. For those who've been listening, I have a garden on the side of my house that's, bees, butterflies. I grow things that kind of like help them in their life cycle. So something, feeding them, flowering, all that kind of stuff. And I haven't, I've seen a couple monarch butterflies, but I haven't seen any caterpillars or anything like that in a while. And I hadn't been out there. So usually, with a garden, you have to be out there constantly weeding and doing stuff correctly. And the last few weeks have been crazy, and I just haven't really been out there. I went out there the other day, though, and there was 4 monarch butterfly caterpillars, and one was making a canoe. And for those who don't know, monarchs are endangered right now. And I was just, I don't know, something for me, I felt so blessed, because I do understand you have to put work into the garden. And I'm not saying, hey, sometimes if you don't do work, it turns out. No, but I just feel blessed. I feel like God saw that I was busy, smiled on me anyway, even though I should have taken better care of it if I wanted it to, do what it needs to do. But God smiled on me, let that happen. And for me, it's just a huge blessing to just kind of see life, even on that minor, tiny scale. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Kelly, you having a God moment recently you'd like to share with everybody?
It's hard. So I'm probably going to butcher this, because I'm trying to think. I mean, being in ministry, you see God at work in other people's lives.
Yeah.
I know he's been at work in my life. We've been in survival mode with our second baby has kind of gone through a sleep regression and stuff like that. And so I've not been nearly as focused on what the Lord's been doing in my life in that kind of a way. Although we've definitely seen him at work in our home life. But I mean, I have a buddy of mine who, been praying for him for years and years and years. And in the past year or so, he's kind of almost returned to the Lord in some respects, and he's given me an open door to disciple him. And so in many respects, I'd say that's one. It's not nearly as creative as seeing God in a monarch butterfly, but I do see him at work in my buddies' hearts and life. And so maybe I'm just dropping it's like, well, you would say that, Pastor, but
oh man, that's powerful. That's good, man. It's good to hear. That's awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, with that, then I guess we can jump to the outro. Sorry, I kind of stumble on this section that TJ kind of runs when he's not here.
You're good.
So everybody,
you're doing a great job being a one-man band.
Yeah, it's rough without the world's greatest co-host. For those who get the reference, you're welcome. For those who don't, listen to other episodes. Hey, so if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, an enemy, or a cousin. We do like cousins around here. Share it with cousin. Everybody, or most people have a few. And then after that, go to our store, get those comfy shirts I talked about. Go over to Captivate or Apple Podcasts or Patreon if you want some extra content. And if you want to just support our ministry, to educate and unite the church, all that kind of stuff. Check out our other shows on the Anglican Ministries Podcast Network. Mentioned that before. I do one over there, Dummy for Theology. TJ starting a hockey one up soon. So, tune in. We got all kinds of stuff. Systematic Geekology. I'm on there. And then Kelly and myself's friend, Christian Ashley, is like, right now, I feel like he's like the top dog. He does most of the episodes, I think. So you guys check that out. Hope you enjoyed this show. Come back next week when we'll be continuing our ecumenical aesthetics series. We're going to continue our series here with Father Jonathan Resmini. He's going to be joining us to discuss what art is like and how it's used in the Eastern Orthodox Christian tradition. So we mentioned that here a little bit, but we'll talk about it more next week. So tune in. After that, we're going to talk with Pastor Joe Day about his experience with art in the church as he's worked in and out of home churches. And right now, he's actually a minister of media kind of stuff, online media stuff. So I'm sure he'll have some unique aspects we can discuss. And then after we conclude our series, after that, we're going to conclude our series with Professor Chris Moreland of the Catholic tradition. And we're going to discuss how statues, other images are used in the Catholic Church. We're going to take a short break after the series before we get back to our normal episodes that you guys are, I'm sure, looking forward to. Finally, at the end of season 1, Francis Chan is going to be joining us as soon as someone lets him know. Someone's got to tell him, but he'll be here.
Yeah.
All right.
Francis Chan's been almost going to come onto the show for a few years now.
Yeah,
I think.
many years. He's just been waiting. He's been anxiously waiting for me to send that email.
Thank you for listening to the Whole Church Podcast. Again, you could always sponsor our show at patreon.com/the Whole Church Podcast, or on captivate.fm, or on Apple Podcasts. You can also leave us a one-time tip through Captivate. Thank you for listening.